The city disappeared in my rear-view mirror. It was being erased. Building by building, I'd watched the skyscrapers shrink first, then the suburbs thin out until finally even the gas stations grew sparse. Now there was nothing but timber pressing in from both sides of a roadway that got narrower with every mile. I rolled down the pane and breathed in air that smelled pine sap and wet earth. No exhaust fumes, no neighbor's cigarette plume drifting through sheet-thin apartment walls, no lingering scent of the Chinese restaurant below my former sleeping nook pane. The divorce papers were still in my glove compartment. Unsigned, Sarah's lawyer had called 3 times this week. I turned my phone off 2 days ago and hadn't checked it since. My pickup bounced over another pothole, the suspension groaning in protest. What had started as asphalt had degraded to stone-churned track, then to this, a rutted earth track that seemed determined to shake my fillings loose. The Saturn AV had lost signal an hour back. I was navigating by the printed directions they'd mailed me, following landmarks sharp bend after 3 large boulders and ford small creek. It felt instructions to buried treasure. A modest wooden building with a green iron roof, a flagpole, and a couple of vehicles parked outside. I pulled in beside a mud-splattered wilderness service pickup and cut the engine. The stillness hit me, a physical presence after hours of roadway noise. No horns, no sirens, no construction, birds, and the occasional rustle of wind through leaves. This was what I'd wanted, what I'd needed. For months of solitude, for months of not having to explain myself to anyone. The station's interior was all wood paneling and bulletin boards covered with survey maps and notices. A stuffed owl watched me from above a doorway, its glass eyes catching the light. A woman emerged from a back office, palm extended. She was in her mid-40s, auburn hair pulled back in a neat braid, wearing the khaki uniform of the Wilderness Service with the sleeves rolled up to reveal freckled forearms. Her grip was firm. No nonsense. Warden supervisor for this district. Roadway wasn't as bad as I expected. Something flickered across her face. Amusement maybe, but she nodded. Mason is getting your supplies together. Let's handle the paperwork first. She led me to a desk where forms were already laid out in neat stacks. Standard stuff, Elena said, voice clipped, tapping a pen against the top sheet. Emergency contact information, acknowledgement of risks, equipment responsibility forms. I scanned the documents, signing where indicated. The acknowledgement of risks form was longer than I'd anticipated, covering everything from wildlife encounters to wilderness blazes to the possibility of falling from the Watchtower. Quite the list, I commented, initiating a paragraph about accepting responsibility for my own evacuation in case of medical emergency. Elena's smile didn't reach her eyes. We have to be thorough. You'll be 70 miles from the nearest hospital. As I finished the last form, a man shuffled in from a side threshold, arms loaded with boxes. He was younger than Elena, maybe late 20s, with disheveled blonde hair and a uniform that looked he'd slept in it. This is Mason Baker, Elena said, voice clipped. He handles equipment and logistics. Mason nodded without making eye contact, setting the boxes on the counter. His movements were quick and efficient despite his rumpled appearance. Everything's inventoried, he said, voice clipped, his voice surprisingly clear for someone who seemed so uncomfortable. Basic supplies, emergency kit, set equipment. He pushed a clipboard toward me. I scrolled my signature while Elena retrieved a set of keys from a pegboard. Watchtower keys, she said, voice clipped, dropping them into my palm. The set's already installed and tested. Keep this on you when you're outside the Watchtower. Elena handed me a laminated card. Basic blaze spotting instructions. One small plume can become an inferno in hours if conditions are right. I studied the card, which included diagrams for estimating plume column size and guidelines for reporting locations using the grid system on my Watchtower survey maps. Seems straightforward enough, I said, voice clipped. It is until it isn't, Elena replied cryptically. Nathan Rice works Watchtower 7 about 12 miles northeast of your position. We don't put lookouts too close together, Mason added, still not meeting my eyes. Defeats the purpose of the coverage grid. I nodded, though the thought of my nearest human being 12 miles away sent a small thrill through me. Was exactly what I'd signed up for. The salary will be deposited bi-weekly, Elena continued, handing me another sheet with banking details. First payment should hit your account next Friday. I glanced at the figure again, still surprised by the amount. It was nearly double what similar seasonal positions offered. Is the salary always this good? I asked, too evenly. Elena and Mason exchanged a quick glance I couldn't interpret. And retention has been an issue in recent years. Remoteness isn't for everyone. Mason snorted softly, turning away to adjust something in one of the boxes. Well, I'm not complaining, I said, voice clipped. 4 months of peace and hushed, plus a healthy savings boost sounds perfect to me. Peace and hushed. You'll certainly get that. That should do it. Said if you need anything else, but he hesitated. We can't make supply runs for every little thing. You should get going if you want to reach the Watchtower before black. Their eagerness to send me on my way was palpable. I'd been in the station less than 20 minutes, and they were already ushering me toward the threshold. Mason helped load the supplies into my pickup, working quickly and efficiently despite his awkward demeanor. He arranged everything with surprising care, securing boxes so they wouldn't shift during the drive. The roadway gets worse after the creek crossing, he warned, closing my tailgate. Stay in first gear for the last 3 miles. Elena handed me a final envelope. Survey maps, contact protocols, and emergency procedures. Read them tonight. Good luck, Mr. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her tone made me pause. Is there something else I should know? Another quick glance between them. Follow protocols, Mason said, voice clipped. We send search parties if you go silent, and nobody wants that paperwork. I nodded, starting the engine. As I pulled away, I caught them still standing there in my rear-view mirror, watching me go with expressions that seemed more solemn than the occasion warranted. The drive to my watchtower took another hour, and Mason hadn't been exaggerating about the roadway conditions. What had started as merely rough terrain deteriorated into something that barely qualified as a roadway at all, more a suggestion of where vehicles might possibly pass if they were determined enough. I forded a shallow creek, the water splashing up to my threshold panels, and navigated around fallen branches and rocks that seemed deliberately placed to test my suspension. The wilderness grew denser, older, the timber pressing in until branches scraped against my pain's fingernails. When I finally spotted the iron structure rising above the tree, I let out a breathing I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I parked at the base and stepped out, stretching muscles cramped from hours of tense driving. The watchtower loomed above me, an iron skeleton supporting a small glass room perched 70 feet in the air. From this angle, it looked impossibly tall and precarious, a child's construction of toothpicks that might collapse at any moment. I circled the base, taking it in. For sturdy legs anchored deep in concrete footings, braced with steel beams. A zigzag staircase wound its way up, each landing providing a brief respite before the next flight. At the top, the glass room itself, maybe 15 foot square with panes on all sides. My home for the next 4 months. I leaned against my pickup and looked around at the wilderness stretching in every direction. No roads visible except the rough track I'd arrived on. No buildings, no power lines, nothing but timber and mountains and sky. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of human sound. I could hear birds calling, the rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, but no distant traffic, no airplanes overhead, no hum of air conditioners or refrigerators. For the first time since leaving the city, I smiled without warmth. Smiled without warmth, feeling something unclench in my chest. This was exactly what I needed. My footfalls clanged against the iron stairway as I made my way up. The zigzag pattern meant I couldn't see the top until I rounded each corner, making the climb feel longer than it probably was. I decided to bring the lighter supplies first, my duffel bag of clothes, some books, and my personal items before tackling the heavier boxes of food and equipment. The watchtower swayed slightly in the afternoon thin wind. Not enough to be concerning, but enough to remind me I was 70 feet up on what was essentially a giant erector set. Wilderness stretched in every direction, an ocean of green broken only by the occasional rocky outcropping or the silver ribbon of a distant creek. No roads visible except the earth track I'd driven in on, which disappeared into the timber less than a 4 mile from the watchtower base. Perfect remoteness. Exactly what I needed. I continued climbing, my duffel bag bumping against my back with each step. When I finally reached the top landing, I set down my bag and fished out the key Elena had given me. The threshold unlocked with a satisfying click, and I pushed it open to reveal my home for the next few months. The glass room was small but efficiently designed, maybe 15 foot square. Panes wrapped around all 4 sides, offering a 360 degrees view of the surrounding wilderness. A single bed was pushed against one wall, topped with what looked military surplus wool blankets in a drab olive green. A desk occupied the wall opposite the bed, covered with survey maps, charts, and a log book. The set equipment sat on a smaller table next to it. A tiny kitchenette took up one corner, gas stove with 2 burners, a small sink with a palm pump, and a cabinet for storage. The only other furniture was a wooden chair at the desk and a small bookshelf with field guides and what looked paperback novels left by previous occupants. It took 4 trips to bring everything up. Clothes, food, equipment, and the additional supplies Mason had packed for me. I'd need to get used to these stairway quickly. Once everything was inside, I closed the threshold against the cooling afternoon air and began unpacking methodically. There wasn't enough space for a proper dresser. My notebook and pens went on the desk next to the log book. I had enough canned goods to last several weeks. Beans, soups, vegetables, and fruit, bags of rice, pasta, and oatmeal, coffee, tea, and powdered milk. I arranged everything in the cabinet by type, putting the items that would expire first toward the front. After everything was in its place, I sat at the desk and examined the survey maps. One showed the entire national wilderness with my watchtower marked with a red stationed, about 12 miles northeast, according to the scale. Another survey map showed the immediate area around my watchtower in greater detail with topographical lines, creek beds, and game trails marked. The instructions Elena had given me indicated I should use Channel 3 for Tuerto Watchtower communication. Watchtower 4 to Watchtower 7, set check over, I said, voice clipped, following the protocol outlined in my instruction packet. There was a brief burst of static, then a voice came through clearly. Watchtower 4, welcome to the neighborhood. This is Nathan. His voice was friendly and energetic with none of the formality I'd expected from official set communication. Thanks, Nathan. Setting up and thought I'd check the equipment. Over. Good timing. How's the new place treating you? Over. It's smaller than I expected, but it has everything I need. Over. After a week, it'll feel a mansion. Trust me. He paused. Over. I smiled without warmth at his casual disregard for set protocol. Any tips for a first-timer? Over. Plenty. Be super careful with it. I cook big batches and eat leftovers cold rather than heating up every meal, he continued without waiting for my response. For spotting plume, early morning and late afternoon are your prime times. Don't confuse morning mist with plume. Mist dissipates, plume thickens. Keep them around your neck at all times when you're awake. His enthusiasm was infectious. That's helpful. Thanks. Weather patterns are crucial, too. Learn to read the clouds, those charts on your desk. A thunderstorm can mean lightning strikes, which mean potential blazes. We'll chat during morning and evening scheduled calls more if you want. I thought about the divorce papers in my glove compartment. I think I'll manage the solitude fine. That's what they all say at first, Nathan replied. A hint of something. But even the most antisocial types need some human contact eventually. That's what I'm here for. We lookouts got to stick together. I appreciate that. I should finish setting up before the evening scheduled calls with the station. Over. One last thing. Take time to enjoy it. Talk to you at the evening scheduled calls. The set went silent and I set it back in its cradle. Nathan seemed nice enough, if a bit chatty. I suppose was natural for someone who spent months alone in a watchtower. I continued organizing my space, reading through the blaze spotting manual as I worked. By the time the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, I felt reasonably settled in. I made my scheduled evening call to the district outpost at 2000 hours exactly, reporting no plume sightings and confirming I was properly situated in the watchtower. After the call, I heated a can of chicken noodle soup on the gas stove, careful to watch for the invisible burn Nathan had warned me about. The timber became silhouettes, then disappeared entirely into the blackness, leaving only the stars and a sliver of moon providing any light. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no hum of electronics beyond the occasional static from the set. The soft whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of an owl hunting in the blackness. I turned off the battery-powered lantern and sat in the black, watching the night wilderness and listening to the stillness. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest loosen slightly. Out here, Sarah's lawyer couldn't call me. My failures, professional and personal, seemed distant and small compared to the vastness of the wilderness surrounding me. This watchtower, this remoteness, this job. A place where the only person I could disappoint was myself. I climbed into bed and pulled the rough wool blanket over me. Despite its scratchiness, I fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the gentle swaying of the watchtower and the perfect encompassing stillness of the wilderness night. I woke to sunlight streaming through the panes from all directions, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The watchtower swayed slightly in the morning thin wind, a gentle rocking that reminded me I was 70 feet above the ground in my new temporary home. I stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back from the thin mattress, but found I didn't mind it much. My first full day as a blaze lookout. I padded to the sink in my boxers and t-shirt, pumping cold water to splash on my face. The manual had mentioned conserving water, so I used enough to feel human again. Through the eastern panes, the sun was climbing above the tree line, painting the wilderness in gold. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a sunrise without buildings or power lines cutting across it. Endless timber stretching toward the horizon, their canopy rippling water in the morning light. I made coffee on the gas stove, careful to watch for the invisible burn Nathan had warned me about. The rich aroma filled the small glass room as I settled into what would become my morning routine. The protocol sheet Elena had given me was clear. Check the horizon in all directions hourly. Maintain set contact at scheduled times. I took my first cup of coffee to the western pane, raising the field glasses to scan the distant ridge lines. No plume, no movement except birds and the occasional squirrel leaping between branches directly below the watchtower. I made a message in the log book. Clear skies, light thin wind from NW. At precisely 0800, I keyed the set. Watchtower 4 to District Outpost. All clear. A brief crackle. District Outpost to Watchtower 4 received. Weather report. Clear skies. Wind light from northwest. Received. Next scheduled calls 2000 hours. Out. I wondered how many identical conversations I'd have over the next 4 months. I spent the morning familiarizing myself with the survey map spread across the desk. Memorizing the names of ridges, valleys, and landmarks I'd be referencing if I spotted plume. The topographical lines revealed the landscape secrets, where water flowed, where lightning might strike, where blazes could spread fastest. By noon, I'd settled into a rhythm. Record in the log. Read a chapter of my book, a dog-eared copy of Theo's Walden. That seemed appropriate. Prepare a simple meal. I heated a can of beef stew for lunch, eating it straight from the pot while standing at the north pane, watching a hawk circle lazily over the wilderness. I organized my supplies again, made more detailed notes about the surrounding terrain, and read 2 more chapters. The solitude felt a balm. No emails demanding responses, no phone calls from Sarah's lawyer, no colleagues asking for help with projects I didn't care about anymore. Me, the wilderness, and the sky. For dinner, I boiled water for instant mashed potatoes and mixed in a can of tuna. Not exactly gourmet, but filling enough. As I ate, I watched the sun begin its descent, casting longer shadows through the timber. The wilderness took on a different character in the fading light, deeper, more mysterious. After my 2,000 hours scheduled calls, which went as smoothly as the mornings, I decided to start a journal. Not something I'd planned, but suddenly it seemed important to record my thoughts, not my observations of the wilderness. I found a blank notebook on the bookshelf and opened it under the warm glow of the battery-powered lantern. Day 1, I wrote, "The stillness here has substance. I keep expecting to feel lonely, but instead I feel unburdened. I've set down something heavy I didn't know I was carrying." I paused, tapping my pen against the page, searching for the right words to describe the strange peace I'd found so quickly in this isolated place. A whistling sound, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere below the Watchtower. At first, I thought it might be the wind finding a gap in the Watchtower's structure, creating that hollow musical sound. But there was barely a thin wind tonight. The whistling continued, slow, methodical notes that formed no melody I recognized. It wasn't random. There was intention behind it, a pattern that repeated, and it was moving, circling counterclockwise around the base of the Watchtower. I crossed to the west pane, then the north, then east, following the sound as it traveled. The blackness between the timber was nearly absolute. The moon was a sliver, providing barely enough light to distinguish the treetops from the sky. "Hello," I called out immediately, feeling foolish. They wouldn't hear my voice unless I shouted, and something told me that would be a mistake. I grabbed my torch from the desk and shined it downward through each pane as I followed the sound. The beam cut through the blackness, but revealed nothing except pine needles, fallen branches, and the occasional moth drawn to the light. My heart rate picked up. The nearest hiking trail was 8 miles away according to the survey maps. The access roadway I'd driven in on barely existed on official survey maps. Nobody should have been able to find this place in the black, let alone have any reason to. I reached for the set. "Watchtower 4, Watchtower 7, come in. Nathan, you there?" I tried again, adjusting the frequency slightly, but the result was the same. We talked hours ago during the evening scheduled calls, the connection crystal clear. The whistling grew louder, and now I could hear something else. Breaking branches, the rustle of pine needles, the occasional thud that suggested significant weight. Whatever was down there was large. I tried but again received only static in response. I set the set down and moved back to the panes, tracking the sounds as they circled. The whistling had taken on a quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. Not quite human, but too deliberate to be anything else. It held notes too long with a verto that seemed impossible for human lungs. I'd brought it mostly for target shooting to pass the time, but now I found myself pulling it out, checking that it was loaded. The circling continued for nearly an hour. Occasionally, the whistling would stop, replaced by a stillness more unnerving than the sound itself, only to resume moments later from a different position. Whatever was down there was toying with me. I realized it knew I was watching, listening. No final notes, no fading into the distance, complete stillness that felt even heavier than before. I waited, rifle ready, ears straining for any hint of movement. The gentle creak of the watchtower and the night-thin wind and my own breathing too loud in the confined space. I couldn't. I kept the rifle across my lap and rotated between the panes, watching the black wilderness for any sign of movement. A hunter lost and disoriented. Some local playing a prank on the new lookout. None of the explanations felt right. Whatever had circled my watchtower knew exactly what it was doing. I checked my watch obsessively, willing the night to end. At some point, I tried the set again, but the static remained unbroken. Finally, the eastern sky began to lighten, black fading to deep blue, then to the pale lavender of approaching dawn. As the first golden rays broke through the timber, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. I'd made it through the night, but as I looked down at the wilderness floor, now visible in the morning light, I knew with certainty that whatever had visited me would return, and next time whistling might not be all it had in mind. Not the pleasant, distant chirping I'd imagined when taking this job, but the harsh, insistent cawing of crows right outside my panes. I sat up, rubbing sleep from my eyes, my back stiff from spending the night in the chair. Morning light streamed through the panes, revealing the watchtower room exactly as it had been. No broken locks, no signs of intrusion. Me alone with the memory of that whistling circling below. I stood and stretched, wincing at the popping in my spine. The wilderness looked different in daylight, less threatening, more mundane. No mysterious figures lurked between trunks. No whistling. Sleep deprivation could do strange things to a person's mind. Or maybe it had been the wind playing tricks, finding odd angles in the watchtower's iron supports. I made coffee stronger than usual, and drank it black while staring out the north pane. The set sat silent on the desk. I hadn't tried it again since the static fill attempts last night. The logical part of my brain, the part that had once analyzed spreadsheets and quarterly projections, told me to document everything in the logbook, make my morning scheduled calls, and continue as normal. But another part, a more primitive part, needed to know what had been circling my watchtower. I finished my coffee, loaded the rifle, and slung it over my shoulder. The iron stairway clanged under my boots as I descended, each step echoing through the morning stillness. I paused halfway down, scanning the wilderness floor. Nothing moved except shadows cast by branches in the thin wind. Birds called, insects buzzed, normal wilderness sounds that should have been reassuring, but somehow weren't. The ground around the watchtower base told a different story than my rational mind wanted to believe. Pine needles had been disturbed in a rough circle, swept into unnatural patterns. Branches lay broken, some snapped completely, others hanging at odd angles. Something had definitely been here, something large enough to leave a trail. I knelt to examine a particularly clear section of disturbed earth. The indentations weren't clear enough to call footprints, but they suggested weight and movement. Something heavy circling my watchtower. Standing, I noticed a game track where the disturbance continued outward from the circle. Broken twigs and bent undergrowth formed a trail leading roughly east. I hesitated, glancing back up at my watchtower, my safe perched 70 feet above the wilderness floor, then back at the trail. The morning sun warmed my face. Daylight made the decision easier. I could follow the trail a short distance, see where it led, and be back before noon. I adjusted the rifle on my shoulder and started walking, following the game track of broken vegetation. Snapped branches at shoulder height, crushed ferns, disturbed leaf litter. About 50 yards from the watchtower, the trail ended abruptly at the base of a large pine. I almost missed it. I stopped breathing. I stepped back instinctively, my breakfast coffee threatening to come back up. The palm had been cut cleanly at the wrist, the flesh pale, but not bloodless. A thin trickle of red ran down the bark, still wet enough to glisten in the dappled sunlight. This was recent. The fingers were split out, held in place by a single heavy spike driven through the palm. Beneath it, partially hidden by the curled fingers, was a folded piece of sheet, pinned by the same spike. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look more closely. Average size, but calloused. The nails short and practical. I needed to document this. I pulled out my phone and took several photos, though I knew there was no signal to send them anywhere. Then I reached into my pocket for my Swiss Army knife. It took considerable force to extract it. As the spike came free, I caught the palm and sheet together before they could fall to the ground. The sheet was folded once, ordinary white printer sheet. I opened it with one palm, still holding the cut clean palm in my other, one word printed in block letters. The handwriting was precise, each letter carefully formed. Not the hasty scrawl of someone working quickly in fear of discovery, but deliberate. I stared at the message, then at the palm, then back at the message. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a random act of violence. Someone knew I was here, knew exactly where to place this gruesome marker for me to find. I pulled a plastic sandwich bag from my pocket. I'd brought it thinking I might collect some interesting pine cones or rocks and carefully placed both the palm and message inside. The absurdity of the action wasn't lost on me. Here I was bagging evidence I was in some crime procedural miles from civilization with no way to contact authorities. I sealed the bag, trying not to look too closely at its contents. The palm was definitely male, probably belonging to someone around my age. The skin tone suggested Caucasian, though it was already taking on the waxy pore of dead flesh. The walk back to the Watchtower seemed to take forever. Every sound made me flinch, a squirrel darting through underbrush, a branch creaking in the wind. I kept the rifle ready, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against someone who left cut clean hands as welcome gifts. Back inside the Watchtower, I locked the threshold behind me and dragged the chair against it for good measure. I placed the bag in my cooler, pushing aside my meager food supplies to make room. The cold wouldn't preserve it forever, but it might slow decomposition until I could show someone. I took more photos of the palm, the message, both together, documenting everything as clearly as possible. Then I sat at my desk staring at the set. Someone had been murdered, or at least maimed, in my vicinity. But the set had failed me last night when I needed it. What if whoever left that palm was listening to the frequencies? Someone had been killed near my Watchtower, recently enough that blood was still flowing. The killer knew exactly where I was, and they had left me a message. Not a threat, but a welcome, as if I were expected. My presence here was part of some plan. I looked out the panes at the vast wilderness stretching in every direction. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting, and I was exactly where they wanted me to be. I reached for the set, my fingers trembling as they closed around the handset. The cut clean palm in my cooler felt it was pulsing through the plastic, a grotesque heartbeat that existed only in my imagination. I needed to tell someone. Watchtower 7, this is Watchtower 4. Nathan, do you copy? My voice cracked on the last word. Static hissed back at me for several seconds before Nathan's voice broke through. This is Watchtower 7. Reading you loud and clear. I took a deep breathing, eyes darting to the cooler where I'd stored my grisly discovery. Nathan, something happened. The words hung in the air, sounding absurd, even to my own ears. It's fresh, still bleeding. I have photos. I have the actual palm in my cooler. I expected shock, horror, immediate instructions to evacuate. Instead, Nathan chuckled. They got you good this year. What? The locals, man. Hunters, teenagers, whoever. His voice was casual, almost bored. Turned out to be deer parts arranged to look human. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. No, Nathan. I'm looking at it right now. The fingernails, the skin texture. There was a pause, a slight shift in Nathan's tone when he responded. Look, Daniel, I get it. But trust me, if you report this to the rangers, they're going to think you're another city boy who can't handle the remoteness. But the Wilderness Service doesn't exactly appreciate lookouts who get spooked by every strange thing they encounter, Nathan continued, his voice lowering. They have been known to terminate contracts early for people who create unnecessary problems. They need people who can handle solitude without freaking out. I stared at the cooler. The evidence was right there. What if I was overreacting to some elaborate prank? Has this happened before? I mean, every season, Nathan confirmed. Sometimes it's fake body parts. Once they rigged speakers to play children laughter. I ran a palm through my hair, conflicted. You've got a supply run in what, 2 weeks? If you're still convinced it's real by then, bring it with you. Much better than trying to explain it over the set and sounding you're losing it. His logic made a certain sense, and the alternative that someone had actually been murdered near my watchtower was almost too horrific to contemplate. All right, I said, voice clipped finally. I'll wait. Now tell me about your day. I let the conversation drift to normal lookout duties, but my eyes kept returning to the cooler. I performed my duties methodically, scanning the horizon for plume, recording weather data in the log book, making my scheduled calls. The palm remained in my cooler, sealed in its plastic bag, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. But with each passing day of routine and hushed, Nathan's explanation began to seem more plausible. Nathan had been a high school English teacher before taking the lookout job 5 years ago. Needed a break from teenage drama, he explained on the second night. Ended up coming back every year. What about during the offs? I asked, too evenly, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. Substitute teaching, mostly some freelance editing. Nothing that would tie me down. There was something in his voice, a careful distance that I recognized from my own evasions when people asked, too evenly about my marriage. We discussed books we'd both read, argued good-naturedly about film adaptations, and shared bits of our pre-war lives. I told him about my architectural firm, skipping over the part where I'd been quietly pushed out after the divorce proceedings started. He told me about growing up in Montana, learning to track and hunt from his grandfather. I still checked it daily, but more out of morbid curiosity than genuine concern. The blood had dried, the flesh taking on a waxy appearance that made it look less real, more a movie prop. That evening, I settled into my usual spot by the pane, set in palm, watching blackness claim the wilderness as I waited for our scheduled chat. Watchtower 4, this is Watchtower 7. Nathan's voice crackled through at exactly 2,000 hours. Watchtower 7. This is Watchtower 4. How's it going over there? Same old, same old. Though, I did spot a black bear wandering through my clearing this afternoon. Big guy, probably 300 pounds. A faint sound in the background of his transmission. A wailing noise, multiple voices crying together, holding notes that wavered unnaturally. Nathan, what's that sound on your end? What sound? I pressed the handset closer to my ear. It reminded me of the whistling I'd heard circling my watchtower, but more complex. More voices layered together in a discordant chorus. That crying or wailing sound, it's coming through your transmission. His voice remained steady, but something had changed. A tension that hadn't been there before. The wailing intensified, rising and falling in a pattern that felt almost language. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Nathan, I can hear it clearly. His friendly tone vanished, replaced by something urgent and hard. I need you to go lock your threshold right now. What? Why? He cut me off. Stay inside no matter what happens. No matter what you hear, no matter who calls your name, do not open that threshold until morning. Piercing and inhuman. Nathan, what's happening? Lock your threshold. Each word was deliberate, forceful. Now, Daniel, I have to. The set cut to dead static, a harsh white noise that filled my small glass room. I called Nathan's name repeatedly, frantically adjusting the dial, but received nothing but that empty hiss in return. I looked at my unlocked threshold, suddenly aware of how thin it was, how easily it could be broken. Outside, the wilderness had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, no birds, a waiting stillness that felt more threatening than any noise. I moved to the threshold on unsteady legs and turned the lock with a decisive click. I locked all the panes next, methodically moving around the Watchtower glass room, checking each latch twice. The iron frames felt cold against my fingertips, a stark contrast to my feverish skin. I needed to be thorough. It wasn't particularly heavy. A simple iron frame with a laminated top, but it was the most substantial piece of furniture I had. I emptied the drawers, stacking the log books and survey maps on the bed, then dragged the desk across the wooden floor. The legs screeched against the boards as I positioned it against the threshold, wedging it tightly under the handle. That won't hold long against anything determined, I muttered to myself. But it might buy me time. I retrieved my rifle from under the bed and checked it meticulously. The weight felt reassuring in my hands as I loaded it. I'd brought it for target shooting, never imagining I'd be using it for protection. Against what, I still wasn't sure. From here, I had a clear line of sight to the entrance while keeping the panes in my peripheral vision. The rifle rested across my lap, loaded and ready. The first hour passed in complete stillness. The occasional creak of the watchtower swaying slightly in the wind and my own measured breathing. I checked my watch repeatedly, watching the minutes tick by with excruciating slowness. I was beginning to think Nathan's warning had been an overreaction when it started. Laughter, not the warm, genuine kind that brings people together, but something twisted and wrong. Multiple voices overlapping and discordant. The sound seemed to stretch and distort, hanging in the air well past when human lungs would have emptied. I tightened my grip on the rifle, my knuckles turning white. The laughter circled the watchtower as the whistling had on previous nights. It moved with deliberate slowness, pausing occasionally before continuing its circuit. I couldn't see anything through the panes, blackness, and the distant stars. But I knew something was out there, something that wanted in. As the laughter completed its third circuit around the watchtower, it changed, blending with that same wailing I'd heard in the background of Nathan's set transmission. The sounds merged into something that wasn't quite language, but carried meaning nonetheless. A primal communication that bypassed my conscious mind and spoke directly to the ancient part of my brain that recognized predators. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Heavy and measured, they began ascending the iron stairway. The entire watchtower trembled with each step, the vibrations traveling up through the floor and into my bones. Thump, thump, thump. I raised the rifle to my shoulder, aiming at the threshold. My breathing quickened, but I forced myself to slow it down, to focus. Through the small pane in the upper half of the threshold, I could see a massive shape blocking out the stars. Not human, too large, too oddly proportioned. Then the threshold handle began to rotate, slowly testing the lock. It turned as far as it would go, then back, then forward again with more force. Finding it secured, the handle stilled. Then the pounding began. The first blow hit with such force that the entire threshold frame shuddered. The second hit came immediately after, more powerful than the first. Splinters of wood flew from the frame. By the third hit, the frame was fracturing, long cracks spreading outward from the hinges. The desk skidded further back, no longer providing any meaningful resistance. I retreated until my back pressed against the far wall, the rifle still aimed at the threshold. My finger hovered over the trigger, ready. The fourth blow tore one of the hinges completely free from the wall. The fifth finished the job, sending the threshold crashing inward. It hit the floor with a deafening bang, raising a cloud of dust, and then it entered. The creature had to duck to fit through the doorway, its massive antlers scraping against the top of the frame. Once inside, it straightened to its full height, at least 8 foot tall, its antlers nearly brushing the ceiling. It had a deer skull for a head, bleached white in the moonlight streaming through the panes. Too large, too many points, branching in ways that defied nature. Empty eye sockets somehow still conveyed a terrible awareness as they fixed on me. Its body was a grotesque patchwork. Human limbs attached at odd angles with too many joints that bent in impossible directions. Patches of fur alternated with exposed muscle and sinew. Someone had attempted to assemble a being from parts of various animals, but had given up halfway through. The creature stood motionless in the doorway, its skull head tilted slightly as it regarded me. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a low, continuous sound wind through a bone flute. I raised the rifle higher, centering the sights on what would be the creature's chest, a mess of matted fur and glistening tissue. My finger tightened on the trigger. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky yet fluid, a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. Its arms, too long with elbows that bent both ways, hung at its sides, fingers ending in curved talons that scraped against the wooden floor. It was fully inside the glass room now, blocking my only exit. I could smell it, a nauseating mixture of wet fur, rotting meat, and something chemical and sharp that burned my nostrils. My eyes watered, but I didn't dare blink. The creature's head swiveled toward the cooler where I'd stored the cut clean palm. It made that laughter sound again, the same one I'd heard outside. But now I could see how its jaw stretched unnaturally wide to produce it. Whatever had been circling my watchtower for nights, whatever had been hunting in these woods long before I arrived. And I knew it had come for me. I watched in horror as the creature's jaw unhinged as snakes, stretching to an impossible width. That same disturbing laughter I'd heard outside the watchtower now erupted from deep within its throat. A cacophony of overlapping voices that seemed to mock my terror. No time to think, only react. The rifle kicked against my shoulder, the report deafening in the small glass room. The bullet tore through the creature's torso, punching a hole clean through what should have been vital organs. Black, viscous fluid, not quite blood, oozed from the wound. It didn't even flinch. I fired again and again and again. 3 more holes leaking black goop oil from a punctured machine. Something chemical and wrong, formaldehyde mixed with rotting meat. The creature tilted its skull head, those empty eye sockets somehow conveying curiosity. It took another step forward, its patchwork body of mismatched human limbs moving with that same jerky yet fluid motion that defied natural movement. The rifle now empty and useless in my hands. The creature reached for me with an arm that bent in all the wrong places. Its fingers were too long, too thin, pale spider legs. When it grabbed me, the touch was ice cold and burning hot at the same time. My feet dangling uselessly in the air. For one terrible moment, it held me at eye level. That deer skull face inches from mine. Then it hurled me a ragged doll. I flew through the shattered doorway, tumbling onto the iron landing outside. My back slammed against the railing, knocking the wind from my lungs. The impact bent the iron outward, and for one heart-topping moment, I felt myself tipping backward into 70 feet of empty air. My hands shot out, grabbing the railing as my lower body swung out over the abyss. My feet kicked at nothing but night air as I dangled. With a desperate heave, I pulled myself back onto the landing, gasping. The creature squeezed through the doorway, its body contorting in ways that shouldn't be possible. The antlers scraped against the iron frame, making a sound nails on a chalkboard. It filled the narrow landing, blocking my only escape route down the stairway. I scrambled to my feet, looking frantically for any way past it. The landing was barely 6 foot square. I feinted left, then tried to dodge right, hoping to slip past and reach the stairway. That unnaturally jointed arm shot out again, fingers closing around my throat. It lifted me off my feet for the second time. It held me suspended over the edge for a moment that stretched into eternity. I could see the wilderness floor far below, bathed in moonlight. Then it pulled me back and hurled me down the iron stairway instead. I tumbled head over heels, my world becoming a blur of pain and clanging iron. My shoulder hit first, then my hip, then my head. Each impact sent fresh agony shooting through my body. After what felt forever, I managed to catch a support beam 2 flights down. My fingers wrapping around cold iron with bruising force. The sudden stop wrenched my shoulder. Nearly dislocating it. My rifle, knocked loose during the fall, clattered away into the blackness below. Each metallic bounce marking its descent until a final thud signaled it had reached the ground. I hung there for a moment, gasping, every muscle screaming. Above me, the creature had already begun its pursuit, but it wasn't using the stairway. Instead, it crawled face first down the outside of the watchtower, its limbs bending at impossible angles as it skittered some monstrous spider, its antlers scraped against the iron framework, sending vibrations through the entire structure. Shit, I muttered, forcing my battered body into motion. I pulled myself up and staggered down the next flight of stairway. Each step sending jolts of pain through my ribs. The creature was gaining, moving faster than anything its size should be able to. A wet rattling sound, air being forced through a clogged pipe. Halfway down the next flight, disaster struck. Maybe during the creature's initial climb up and my ankle twisted with a sickening pop. White-hot pain shot up my leg and I collapsed, barely catching myself on the railing. When I tried to put weight on it, my leg buckled immediately, sprained, maybe broken. I looked up to see the creature had reached the landing above me. It paused, that skull face tilting as it observed my predicament. The laughter came again, but softer now, almost contemplative. I dragged myself down 3 more steps, my injured ankle trailing uselessly behind me. The iron stairway swayed slightly under the creature's weight as it began to descend normally now, savoring the hunt, knowing I couldn't escape. The reality of my situation crashed down on me with crushing clarity. I was still at least 40 feet above the ground, too high to jump without shattering both legs. The only game track down was blocked by this nightmare creature. And even if I could somehow get past it, my ankle wouldn't carry me far. I backed against the railing, trapped between the approaching monster and a fatal drop, my breathing coming in ragged gasps. The creature took another step down. Its movements deliberate now, unhurried. Those empty eye sockets somehow held malevolent intelligence as it closed the distance between us. That's all that separated us now. I glanced down at the ground far below, then back at the approaching horror. Neither option offered much hope, but at least one would be quick. The shotgun blast cracked through the air thunder. Buckshot peppering the iron stairway inches from the creature's skull. "Get down here," he shouted, taking aim again. The creature twisted its antler head toward this new threat, the empty eye socket somehow conveying surprise. That momentary distraction was all I needed. I dragged myself down another step, my ankle screaming with each movement, leaving a smear of blood on the iron. This time, the buckshot hit the creature square in its patchwork torso, tearing chunks of fur and that strange black fluid from its body. The impact knocked it back against the railing, which bent outward with a metallic groan. "Move your ass," Nathan yelled, working the pump action again. I half climbed, half fell down another flight, my good leg taking most of my weight, while my injured ankle trailed uselessly behind. The watchtower swayed with the creature's movements as it recovered and started descending again, faster now, more focused on Nathan than me. Nathan fired a third time, the blast echoing through the wilderness. If anything, it moved faster, its limbs bending at impossible angles as it scrambled down the iron framework. "It's not stopping," I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. "Keep coming down," Nathan called back, firing again. I was maybe 20 feet from the ground now, close enough to see the sweat on Nathan's forehead, the determined set of his jaw. He fired his fifth shot, emptying the shotgun as the creature reached the second landing. Sensing Nathan's vulnerability, I watched in horror as Nathan tossed the empty shotgun aside and reached into his jacket. He pulled out what looked a flare gun, took aim, and fired in one fluid motion. The flare shot upward in a streak of brilliant red, hitting the creature directly in its skull face. The impact ignited with a blinding flash, and the creature reacted instantly, its body convulsing as it emitted a sound I'll never forget. It was iron being torn apart, mixed with the bugle of an elk, high-pitched and guttural at the same time. The noise vibrated through the Watchtower's iron frame, rattling my teeth. The creature backed up against the railing, those unnaturally jointed arms covering its skull face. The flare continued to burn, casting everything in a hellish red glow. Plume curled from where the phosphorus stuck to bone. I used the distraction to descend another flight, now 10 feet from the ground. My ankle had gone from screaming pain to a disturbing numbness, and I could feel warm blood soaking into my sock. Nathan was already reloading the flare gun, his movements quick and practiced. The creature lowered its arms, revealing scorched bone where the flare had hit. It tilted its head, focusing those empty sockets on Nathan with what could only be described as hatred. "Come on, you bastard," Nathan muttered, raising the flare gun again. The creature lunged down the stairway, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Nathan stood his ground and fired the second flare directly at its chest. The projectile hit with another flash of brilliant red, igniting patches of fur and sinew. The creature's body erupted in flames where the flare stuck, spreading quickly across its patchwork torso. With a movement too quick to follow, the burning monster leaped sideways off the Watchtower, clearing the railing in a single bound. It crashed through the upper branches of a pine tree and disappeared into the wilderness, leaving a trail of burning vegetation in its wake. The sound of splintering wood and that terrible screaming faded as it fled deeper into the timber. I made it to the last few steps before my good leg finally gave out. I tumbled the remaining distance, landing hard on the pine needle-covered ground. Pain shot through my body from a dozen different places, but the overwhelming relief of being on solid earth again almost made it bearable. Nathan was at my side in seconds, his face streaked with sweat and soot from the flares. He helped me into a sitting position, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line where the creature had disappeared. I tried to put weight on my injured ankle and nearly blacked out from the pain. "It's broken or badly sprained." "Shit." Nathan glanced nervously at the wilderness again. "It'll be back once the blaze goes out." "What the hell was that thing?" I demanded, clutching my ankle. Nathan's expression darkened. The word heavy with meaning. "Ancient creature that's been hunting these forests for generations." "A what?" I stared at him in disbelief. "And the Wilderness Service has known about it all along." His laughter was bitter, humorless. "Why do you think they salary so well for a job that requires you to sit in a watchtower and look for plume?" The realization hit me another fall down those iron stairway. The lookout jobs aren't about watching for blazes. Nathan finished helping me to my feet or foot since I couldn't put any weight on the injured one. "They're bait sacrifices to keep the Wendigo confined to this remote area." I leaned heavily against him, my mind reeling. "That's insane." Nathan started moving us toward my pickup, supporting most of my weight. Without humans to hunt during summer, it would venture to populated areas searching for food. One lookout every few months keeps it satisfied. His voice was flat. Cheaper to hire replaceable lookouts than deal with the fallout of that thing reaching a town. I looked back at the Watchtower where I'd nearly died. Then at the black wilderness where the creature, the Wendigo, had disappeared. The overly friendly rangers, the absurdly high salary, the remoteness, the joke of a training program. They hired me to die, I whispered. He helped me limp toward my pickup, both of us listening for any sound of the creature's return. Hired to die, I finally managed. They knowingly sent people out here as bait. Nathan's face was grim in the fading light. His eyes constantly scanning the tree and as he supported my weight. Why do you think the salary is so good? Happens every year. My stomach lurched. Jesus Christ, I muttered, wincing as I shifted my weight. So that orientation, the paperwork, all that about early blaze detection, pain dressing. Nathan adjusted his grip around my waist as we limped toward my pickup. They need enough legitimacy to keep the operation running. The real job is being monster food. I thought about Elena's practiced smile, Mason's inability to make eye contact. The way they'd watched me drive away. They'd known exactly what they were sending me to. How did you survive? I asked, too evenly, glancing back at the Watchtower looming against the darkening sky. Nathan's laughter was hollow. After that, I learned the Wendigo has patterns. Hunting grounds, preferred times. He paused, helping me navigate around a fallen log. Light disorients it, and it can be wounded, though not easily killed. And the others, the other lookouts, his stillness told me everything. Some run, some freeze, some fight. We reached my pickup and I leaned against it, grateful for something solid. Each pulse of pain made my vision swim. Why'd you help me? I asked, too evenly. Nathan looked away, his jaw tight. Heard too many screams over the set. He met my eyes again. How to fight back. Couldn't let it happen again. Won't you get in trouble with the wilderness service? His bitter smile didn't reach his eyes. Fresh meat. He helped me onto the passenger side of my pickup. I hadn't even noticed he was holding my keys. You've got two options, he said, voice clipped, sliding into the driver's seat, but not starting the engine. You can stay. We could work together, track it all summer, maybe even find a way to end this. He paused, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel. Never come back, never speak of what happened here. And if I leave and talk, his expression darkened. The Wilderness Service has ways of ensuring stillness, unpleasant ways. They've been doing this for generations, Daniel. They're good at making problems disappear. I looked down at my throbbing ankle, then out at the Watchtower where I'd nearly died, and finally to the black wilderness where that thing, that Wendigo, was still out there. Probably watching us right now. The decision was obvious. I'm leaving, I said, voice clipped. Nathan nodded unsurprised. He started the engine. Smart choice. We drove in stillness for several minutes. The headlights cutting a narrow game track through the blackness. Each bump sending fresh pain through my ankle. In the cooler. Was that last summer's lookout? Nathan confirmed. It likes to play with its food. The whistling around my Watchtower, the laughter. It had been toying with me all along. And Nathan, is that even your real name? He glanced at me, then back at the roadway. Does it matter? We reached the junction where the earth roadway met the stone churn track 1. I'll walk back from here. Better if we're not seen together. If anyone asks, you got spooked by wildlife and decided the job wasn't for you. Nothing more. I took the keys, our fingers brushing in the blackness. What about you? Always am. He opened the threshold, then paused. Good luck, Daniel. Swallowed by the night. As I drove away, everything became painfully clear. Elena's overly friendly demeanor, Mason's nervous fidgeting, the absurdly high salary, the remoteness, the joke of a training program. I'd been hired as a sacrifice to keep a monster fed and contained. And only dumb luck and Nathan's conscience had saved me from becoming another missing hiker statistic. The unsigned divorce papers still sat in my glove compartment. Somehow, they didn't seem such a big problem anymore.